Hi Jews, building on my series of videos from defending the tradition, and my last video where we discussed understanding our reality and knowing where we are in our timeline, because the whole story of the Jews is written in the Torah, and we're getting to the end times. We are in the end times, and I explain all that in my previous videos, so please go and watch that. But we said, what can we do, basically? We're aware, a lot of us are aware of certain things in our reality that they're telling us about, for example. And we have knowledge of what's going on. And we said again in my previous video that that's the same thing that happened in Mordechai's time. Mordechai had knowledge, huyada. He knew exactly what's happening in his reality, but he was also a prophet. So he had godly wisdom and he understood it. So they knew what to do. What they did was they fasted. They had to fast for 3 days straight. Then the Queen Esther there did something, and then that's the whole story of Purim, which we're going to now read and try to understand so that we will be actually understand what we have to do at that same time that will come around in our calendar coming up pretty soon. And then hopefully by that time we'll understand how important it is for all the Jews to follow the laws, especially of the Torah. Do everything and do not do anything that the Torah laws say to do or not to do. And don't break that and be scared to break that. Why would you be scared? Because you have acquired a fear of God, which as King Solomon, who had the most wisdom in Kohelet and also in Proverbs, which we've gone through in different videos trying to understand all of this information. And we talked about information control and all that stuff. So please go and watch some of those videos in order to catch up and understand where we're going from here, because I'm not going to explain them, broken chain. I'm not going to explain a lot of those things. Also about consciousness, also about Binah. We're just going to go forwards. So being aware of what's happening, being aware of the time. We know the whole story of the nation of Israel, from the very beginning to the middle to the end. And we're here, 5,785. And these are the end times, because the Chafetz Chaim said that from before the Holocaust. As the Holocaust was about to happen, he understood this is a new period of time. And we talked a little bit about that in our previous video. And we understood that there's something that we can do. We can all start to try to be better Jews. I have videos also about evaluating ourselves. How are we Jewing? There's work that we have to do. We have to understand that the nation of Israel is on a mission throughout time. And time is going to end. There are end times. There's prophecies for that. What's a prophet? A prophet is someone that understands the wisdom of God and understands that. And we will also understand that depending on how much we are trying to understand that. So we're going out to learn the information, and then we are doing everything that we can, because like King Solomon says, there's if you don't achieve at least a fear of God in your lifetime, you've wasted your life, basically. That's what you should at least achieve. You should be scared. You should at least have enough information that you know what's going to happen after you die. After you die and your body is dead, you have enough information to at least be smart enough to be scared of that fate. And so King Solomon tells us, both in Kohelet and in Proverbs, that you have to, if you haven't achieved that, you have achieved no wisdom. In another video I did about unwise and foolish nation, Goy Naval. The nation of Israel, without the wisdom and without the understanding, is like a Goy Naval. And you can go and read about that in Ha'azinu and try to understand that. Don't just read that and be like, well, I read that 100 times. Try to understand what that means, okay? That's our mission, is try to understand. So we're going forwards in time. We're here, 5,705. At this time, not too much time left, and we know we're in the period from the Chafetz Chaim of the Mashiach. The Mashiach has to come. Another Purim has to occur, because what happened in Purim in the middle of our story? Mordechai knew. He had knowledge of all the things that was happening. And he also was a prophet. So he understood what he had to do in order for this plan to not go down. The Holocaust, and we explained this and all that. And all of that in a previous video. And in the Purim videos that I did last year, where I'm just sharing with you what I learned from Rabbi Avigdor Miller on Purim, and you should Google that and try to go and understand. But so what they did there, what happened in Purim, and after that they got the little mini redemption there, and they built the second temple, and that's what we want. We want the final redemption. It's an auspicious time for that. We're in the end times. We have knowledge of what's happening. Now let's use the end time prophecies to understand what we need to do. And let's just do what Mordechai did. Fast. But instead of fasting for 3 days, we only have to fast for 1 day. This day, March 13th. And so we have a lot of time also to get better at learning the Torah and doing it. So without further ado, I'm going to start reading from the Book of Esther. Please get this and all of the Memlas, if you can get them, to read every chapter. Every chapter in the Torah. So every week you're on the right timeline. Let's read. It says, the scroll of Esther must be written like a Torah scroll. It must be written with the same type of ink on parchment, with lines embossed for evenness. A column should be left blank at the beginning and at the end, and the sheet should be sewn together with a thread made from an animal veins or tendons. The Megillah should preferably have a handle of silver or gold, since our sages have taught us that we should make each observance as beautiful as possible. Although the handle can be made of wood, it is preferable to make it out of precious metal to indicate our love for the observance. It's not a burden to us, like we learned in Malachi, in the Malachi prophecy of the end time, where God tells us that he loves us, and we are like, how do you love us? And God tells us, well, you have never really done what I asked you to do, and everything that I've told you to do is loathsome to you. It's loathsome to do. You do my mitzvot, but or maybe you don't anymore to do Shabbat and whatnot. So we should be doing out of our best, and all our money should be going towards making these commandments that we are fulfilling beautiful. So it says, although the handle can be made out of wood, it's preferable to make it out of precious metal to indicate our love for the observances. The Megillah is divided into 17 paragraphs, parashot, and we too shall divide our work into 17 chapters accordingly, rather than follow the chapter divisions found in most printed editions of Esther. So let's read this. Chapter 1. V'yihi b'yamei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh hamelech, mehodu ad Kush, sheva ve'esrim umea medina. It was in the days of Achashverosh. He was Achashverosh who ruled from India to Ethiopia, 127 lands. Because the purpose of this book is to publicize the miracle God did for Israel in the days of Achashverosh, it begins by describing his kingdom. Achashverosh was one of the kings of Persia and Media who came to power in the year 3392. So again, let's look at our whole timeline that we know, because that's part of the information. So just so we understand, creation starts the clock ticking on time here at 0. The middle of our story is what is being described now, and this is the end. We are here 5,785. So in the year 3,392, Achashverosh came. So also the exile, the first temple was before that. First temple. We got exiled. If we have time, we'll go back and read about that. But you can also read about that in some of the prophecies. Explain what happened there when they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that the temple was destroyed. They didn't ever think God would do that to them. They tested God over and over, like God tells us in Malachi. From the very beginning, you strayed. don't stray anymore. Return to me and I will return to you. So from the very beginning, these Jews in that story at that time couldn't believe that happened. And they were exiled from the land. And they were taken into Babylon and Media. It turns out to be after. We're going to learn a little bit of this history, okay? And then here in 3,392, that's when Achashverosh came into power. Okay, so we can get a little bit of an idea about our timeline according to the Torah, which is information that we all need to know. This is the objective reality. This information, we have an unbroken chain with all the dates and all the names of the people that we're talking about. Because in the second temple, in the book of Ezra, like we said, in the book, he names all of the Jews, all the families that came back to build the second temple. So we have an unbroken chain. So we should know our history from our perspective and our information. So he inherited the throne from his father, Cyrus, Koresh, when the Jews had reached their lowest ebb. 70 years have passed since the Jews were exiled to Babylonia. 70 years. So the first temple was destroyed. They were exiled from the land. They were mixed in there for 70 years, okay? And they knew from a prophecy that they were supposed to be redeemed after 70 years. But time changed. Time changed because of the equation here, this mathematical equation between the physical and the spiritual and time. You know, I certainly don't know what the connection is here, but I do know that as time goes on, the spiritual level drops. And that's not because I'm smart, that's because what everyone told us. And also the Chafetz Chaim said that after the second temple, then time was split now into periods. And we see the Tanaic period and the Gaon period, where we see each level of the period is a lower level of the spiritual level of the Torah scholars, because you have to be a very high spiritual level in order to understand the Torah. That's why we don't understand it. That's why you don't understand it or outright reject it, because you have to have a spiritual receptivity, says King Solomon. The only way you're going to have any receptivity is if you start to fear breaking these laws. Therefore, you will keep the laws. And then the circle is not a vicious circle of defeat and getting farther away from God, but rather getting closer, understanding more, practicing more, becoming more observant, become a Torah observant Jew. So 70 years had passed since the Jews were exiled to Babylonia, and they were hoping for their imminent redemption. God fixed their exile to be for 70 years, but when the time came, they were not redeemed because they were not worthy. They were also not worthy. They didn't believe that God would just leave them out there, punishment and no return, because they didn't change anything. They assimilated. This pleased Achashverosh very much, and as we shall soon see, it caused great trouble for the Jews, however, because instead of partaking in the rejoicing of the redemption and Jerusalem, they rejoiced at Achashverosh's feast. This resulted in the divine decree that they would be destroyed through Haman's plot. Just like in our times, we rejoice when we have the Independence Day of the State of Israel. The State of Israel. We celebrate that there's a State of Israel when the temple has not been rebuilt. This is exactly the same thing that we do every year. We celebrate if there wasn't a State of Israel, then there could be another Holocaust. But now we know that that is not true. We saw that. We have knowledge now of the situation, okay? So no more feigning, if there wasn't the State of Israel and the IDF, that they could massacre us again. They did that in the State of Israel. So we shouldn't celebrate like they did with the Feast of Achashverosh. They were supposed to be redeemed. We're supposed to be redeemed. We're supposed to be redeemed. That's the ending of the story. Why are you rejoicing? In anything, even when you get married, you have to smash a glass on the ground to remember the temple, that we haven't built the temple. So don't be too happy ever in this life. But shouldn't we all just serve Hashem b'simcha? And by any means necessary, music, trance music, drugs, alcohol. We just have to be happy. We just have to be happy. What are you happy about? We haven't been redeemed. That's sad. It puts us in a peculiar situation when all of the nations rise up in every single generation to annihilate us. That puts us in danger when we don't remember that we weren't redeemed, and that makes us sad. So that did please, however, the enemy of the Jews, Ahasuerus. He liked that very much. It caused great trouble for the Jews, however, because instead of partaking in the rejoicing of the redemption, which we could have at any time, and Jerusalem, they rejoiced at Ahasuerus' feast. This resulted in the divine decree that they would be destroyed through Haman's plot. The Book of Esther therefore begins with the word V'yehi. See, every single word means something. V'yehi literally translates, and it was. Whenever a section begins with this word, it indicates that woe and grief will follow. The first syllable of V'yehi is V, which literally means alas or woe. The Jews were suffering from exile, and now they would be faced with a greater catastrophe because of the feast of Ahasuerus was preparing. So we can already see that this is how we're supposed to learn the Torah, and this is why Rabbi Yaakov Kuli did this project for us. So you will understand when you're reading, V'yehi means something. Now there's lots of different commentators and lots of different rabbis who explain that one word to us. Like you can see here, when you have that, it's really the first letters means woe. Woi, oi. So there's another reason that the word V'yehi indicates woe and grief. The word yehi, as you can see, maybe, the word yehi actually means it will be. The vav means meaning and, changes the tense from future to past. Interesting. When a person is in serious troubles, he wants it to pass quickly, and he wishes the future would become the past. That's what that word is telling us, because we don't understand time properly. So just to keep that in mind, okay? So one might think that the Babylonian exile was not so bad. The Jews actually had deserved to be exiled to Rome. God saw that they would not be able to survive in Rome, so he had mercy and exiled them to Babylonia, where the rulers were more kind-hearted. So, by the way, all of this has notes, and in the back of the books, it tells you where that information is taken from. Okay, so then if you, for example, see something that's taken from any one of these places, okay, you could go and further look into that. If that interests you, if that really caught your attention, wow, that's remarkable information. Let's see, number 2, where do I go and learn all about that? That's how you should be learning, so you can understand. Okay, so one might, okay, so he said that being exiled into Rome, which is the 4th exile, we know from the book of Daniel, there's 4 exiles, but the 4th one is Rome, and it's very, very tough on us, and it's even broken down there more. So he exiled us first to Babylonia, where the rulers were more kind-hearted. This, however, was true only in the time of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. After Cyrus became king and Persia conquered Babylon, the Babylonian exile became the worst of all exiles. The Persians were extremely cruel and issued decrees threatening Israel's very survival. When Ahasuerus succeeded his father Cyrus, the cruelty of the Persians was not diminished. The Jews were worse off than before. The Megillah therefore begins with the words V'yehi, indicating grief. Instead of the long-awaited redemption, the Jews would now be confronted with Haman's persecutions. Ahasuerus' background was as follows. There was a Persian king by the name of Astyages. He had no sons, only a daughter named Mandane, who was destined to be his heir. She was seduced by one of her father's courtiers and became pregnant. Infuriated, the king had the courtier killed and threw his daughter into prison. When her child was born, the king ordered that he be abandoned on a mountaintop to die of exposure and starvation. Providence intervened. The infant was discovered by a large dog who allowed him to suckle her. The child grew up in the mountains and developed into a powerful warrior. Now, I'm going to stop myself here. Sometimes we hear stories, and remember, this wisdom is wrapped in a story. So some things are like there was an Ahasuerus that happened. All of that stuff. You can go and see, by the way, the graves of Queen Esther and Mordecai in Iran. So all the story happened. There's some things that you might question, but just understand again, that's because of our low spiritual receptivity to that information. We may or may not understand it. And it's possible that the more we grow and the more we purify ourselves, the higher spiritual level we'll have. And then every year when we read the Megillah, we'll understand a little bit more. So if we don't understand, it's not the information's fault. It's our fault that we didn't go and do all the things to have a spiritual receptivity, mostly fearing breaking any of these Torah laws. So the Jews were worse off than before, and the Megillah therefore begins with the word vehi, indicating grief. Instead of the long-awaited redemption, the Jews would now be confronted with Haman's persecutions. Ahasuerus' background was as follows. Like we said, okay, so he abandoned the baby. Sorry about the redundancy here. And Providence intervened, and the infant was discovered by a large dog who allowed him to suckle her. The child grew up in the mountains and developed into a powerful warrior. Before long, he became the leader of a large band of men. Since he had been raised by a dog, they gave him the name Sirius, Kurush, and in ancient Persia, Kurush means dog. Upon discovering that his grandson was alive and leading a band of robbers, sent men to kill him. Sirius and his band proved too strong for the king's men and easily defeated them. The robber band then proceeded to the capital, where Sirius killed his grandfather and assumed the throne of Persia. At the time, Darius was the king of the Medes. When he heard of Sirius's feat, he sent him a message that he wished to seal an alliance by having Sirius marry his daughter. Sirius agreed, and from the union was born Ahasuerus, son of Sirius and grandson of Darius. Sirius's wife was Darius's only child. When Darius died, Sirius inherited the throne of Media. 3 years later, Sirius died, and Ahasuerus inherited the throne of both Persia and Media. The name Ahasuerus is only given to this king in the Megillah. His true name was something that I can't pronounce. Artaxerxes in Persian. Artaxerxes was the generic title given to many Persians rulers, just as Paro was given the title of the kings of Egypt. The Jews, however, referred to him as Ahasuerus, which was a pun on the words chash and rosh, a headache. It was said that one got a headache trying to figure out how to behave during his harsh reign. Some also saw this name as a contradiction of Achiv Shel Rosh, brother of the head. The head in question was Nebuchadnezzar, and the title indicated that Ahasuerus was his brother in cruelty. Just as Nebuchadnezzar had been born under the sign of Mars and was bloodthirsty, so was Ahasuerus. Now let's just take a looky look here into our reality. Why do you think they always want to go to Mars? What's their obsession with Mars? Bloodthirsty, and so was Ahasuerus. When Ahasuerus found out about his nickname, the Jews were ready with a more acceptable explanation. They told him that in Aramaic, the word Achash meant leader. In Hebrew, the word for leader is Rosh. Thus, they called him Ahasuerus, Achash and Rosh. The Jews were placed under the power of such a cruel king because they violated the Sabbath. In the book of Nehemiah in 13:15 to 21, it describes how the Jews often kept their stores open on Friday evening after the proper time. As punishment, God gave Ahasuerus more power than he deserved, allowing him to oppress Israel in full measure. For this reason, he was given dominion over India and all the way to Ethiopia, that is, over the entire civilized world. The more distant a land is from its sovereign, the less he is feared. This, however, was not true in the case of Ahasuerus. He ruled from India to Ethiopia with an iron hand, and all his lands far and near alike had equal fear and respect for him. Ahasuerus actually lost a good deal of his kingdom. In his time, there was a total of 252 nations in the civilized world. Originally, Ahasuerus ruled over all of these. Before long, almost half of his kingdom rebelled and threw off his rule, leaving him with only 127 lands. Ahasuerus received this punishment because he denigrated God's rule. He thus spoke of the God of Israel, whose habitation is in Jerusalem. That's in the Book of Ezra 7:15. His words seem to indicate that God was only in Jerusalem and not elsewhere. So we know that the God of Israel is the God of the reality. And we go through that in all my other videos pretty much. So that's the God that we pray to, the God of all reality. So he was also punished for stopping the building of the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, reneging on the promises made by his grandfather Darius and father Cyrus. When Cyrus married Darius's daughter and was alone with her for the first time, they discussed the political situation. They said, "We are both of royal blood. Why should we be under the dominion of Belshazzar, king of Babylon? Why not rebel against him and capture the great city of Babylon?" Cyrus led his army against Babylon, but could not take it. Belshazzar sent out 1,000 top Jewish officers who decimated Cyrus's army. While Cyrus returned in defeat, Belshazzar went back to Babylon, celebrating his victory. Jewish officers, what are you fighting over there for? What? I mean, shouldn't you be devastated that you haven't returned to Israel? It's been 70 years. Before that night, Belshazzar made a great feast for his 1,000 officers. He ordered that vessels taken from the temple be used. He drank from them with his queen and with his concubines and officers. And that's in Daniel 5:1 and 2. The king kept drinking until he was quite intoxicated. So he used the holy temple cutlery and vessels from God's temple. He used them for his feast. And when he was drunken in a drunken trance, a hand appeared and wrote the words on the wall. Daniel 5:25. Mene mene tekel ufarsin. Mene mene tekel ufarsin. The Aramaic words literally measured, weighed, and divided. That's the writing on the wall, okay? So when Belshazzar saw this writing, he became panicky. He wanted to understand the writing, but he could not read it. The words were in Aramaic, but it was written with Hebrew letters. Finally, he summoned Daniel, who explained the meaning of the words. On that very night, Belshazzar's kingdom would be divided and taken away from him by Darius and Cyrus. Belshazzar was being punished for having made personal use of the vessels of the holy temple. Upon hearing this, Belshazzar turned white with fear and collapsed in a faint. There was an old slave in the palace who had served in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Realizing the truth of Daniel's words, he said to himself, "Tonight Cyrus and Darius will come and take the city. They will kill Belshazzar and his men, and I will also die. The best thing for me to do is to kill Belshazzar and bring his head to Cyrus and Darius. I will ingratiate myself with them and escape being killed." With this thought, the slave killed Belshazzar that night. That's in Daniel 5:30. Then there's other sources that say other stories. So sources have a different version of Belshazzar's death. I guess I'll just read it. We only have 55 days, so... All right, so in those days, there was no bathrooms in the place. In order to answer a call of nature, the king had to go outside. So the guards didn't see him leave, so when he attempted to re-enter the palace, they stopped him. He haughtily announced that he was a king, but the slaves didn't pay any attention to his claims, and they cut off his head. And no one blamed the slaves for what they had done. They had been merely following the king's orders. So, because Belshazzar had been frightened, and so he issued a decree that anyone attempting to enter the palace should be killed, even if they claimed to be the king. And then he himself, that's what happened to him. So Belshazzar had a young daughter named Vashti. She had been sound asleep until she was awakened by the tumult. Vashti saw people killing each other and did not know what was happening. Confused, she rushed to Belshazzar's room and threw herself at Darius's feet, thinking he was her father. When he saw a pretty young girl at his feet, Darius had pity and spared her life. He brought her back to Persia, where he gave her as a wife to his grandson, Ahasuerus, son of Cyrus. At the time of her capture, Vashti was 12 years old. Ahasuerus married her when she was 18, and he then made the great feast of the 3rd year of his reign, as we shall soon see. When Darius found out how Belshazzar had been killed through his own order, he realized that it had clearly been an act of divine providence. He said, unquestionably, he was killed for the sin of the destruction of the temple and for making personal use of its vessels. With that, Darius made an oath that as soon as he sat upon the Babylonian throne, he would order that the temple be rebuilt and its vessels be returned. With the demands of administering a new kingdom, however, Darius forgot his vow until he was reminded of it by Zerubbabel. Darius made his son-in-law, Cyrus, king over Babylon and Media during his own lifetime. He also instructed Cyrus to see to it that the temple would be rebuilt immediately. Cyrus ordered that the temple be rebuilt and all its vessels be restored to the Jews. That's in Ezra 1 and 2. The Jews began to lay the foundations, and Cyrus himself paid the wages of the workers. 2.5 years passed, Cyrus died, whereupon his son Ahasuerus succeeded him. One of the new king's first acts was to halt the building of the temple, and to take its vessels back from the Jews and hold them in his palace. Ahasuerus halted the building of the temple because of false accusations against the Jews, as is described in the Book of Ezra in 4:7. Sabal Tobiah and the scribe Shimshai, one of Haman's sons, wrote the following letter to Ahasuerus. If the Jews are allowed to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, a great rebellion will take place. You know how impregnable the walls of Jerusalem were. Nebuchadnezzar could take the city only after a long siege. And when he took it, he had the walls torn down and the inhabitants driven into exile. Only then could his followers feel safe. You should not allow the Jews to rebuild the walls. If they do, they will rebel and refuse to pay taxes and tribute. Since we eat the king's bread, we love him very much and do not want to see him suffer any losses. We therefore advise that permission to build be withdrawn. This letter was sent upon the advice of none other than Haman. He then presented himself personally before Ahasuerus and explained how the building of the temple would cause the king great harm. As punishment for this, Haman was hanged on a scaffold precisely 50 cubits high, taken from one of the temple's timbers, as we shall see. In doing this, Haman was emulating his ancestor Amalek. So one of the 10 things that we say in the video that I did of the 10 things that a Jew says every day, one of the things is to remember Amalek. And also when we were told at a certain time in our calendar that everyone needs to go and listen to that chapter in the Torah. Everybody is commanded, go and listen to that. Do not forget that in every generation there is an Amalek. In every generation they rise up to kill us. Because there's an Amalek in every generation. So Haman was an Amalek, and he was emulating his ancestor Amalek. As is well known, Amalek attacked Israel very soon after the Israelites had left Egypt and had crossed the Red Sea. Amalek opposes Israel because the Israelites were on their way to the Promised Land to build the Holy Temple. They had thus sung in the song of the Red Sea, "You shall bring them and plant them on the mount of your inheritance, the sanctuary, O God, which your hands have established." Exodus 15:17. For this reason, Amalek opposed Israel on the way to the Holy Land. The nation of Amalek was descended from an individual by the name by that name, Amalek, who was a son of Esav, son Eliphaz. So that's in Genesis 36:12. That's why we need to go and learn our history and see where we come from and where all the other people that are populating the earth come from. That might help us understand anti-Semitism a little bit more. So when Isaac gave the blessing to Yaakov, Jacob, he stated that Jacob's descendants would gain permanent ownership of the Holy Land by building the temple. Therefore, Esav and his descendants attempted to prevent the temple's construction. God therefore prescribed vengeance against Amalek, saying, "When God your Lord has made you safe from all of your enemies in the land that God your Lord has given you, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek under the heavens. Do not forget." That's in Deuteronomy 25:19. The very next verse states, "And it shall be that when you come into the land which God your Lord is giving you," again, that's in Deuteronomy 26:1. The reason for this juxtaposition is that Amalek attacked the Israelites primarily to prevent them from entering the Holy Land and building the temple. Haman was a descendant of Amalek, and according to the tradition of his tribe, did everything in his power to dissuade Ahasuerus from allowing the Jews to rebuild the temple. He was, according to his tribe, according to the tradition of his tribe. Well, Jews, what about the tradition of our tribe? What about the traditions of the nation of Israel? How many of us cling to those traditions, just like other people cling to their other traditions? And one group, their tradition is to annihilate Israel. So let's ask ourselves over and over and over again in history, why did this happen? Why did that happen? Well, there's a bunch of people in the world who their tradition is to blot out the memory of Israel, to kill Israel. So that's what. Okay, and it's our tradition to know that. And it's our tradition to call out to God. And it's our tradition to follow the laws and to learn and understand. That's our tradition. And so Cyrus had issued an edict that anyone who tried to prevent the rebuilding of the temple would be hanged on the gallows. His curse was fulfilled in Haman. Both Haman and his sons were hanged in the gallows made of timber from the temple. It's always like that. Like it's, you try to do that and Dafka, and exactly how you're going to try to do it, you're going to wind up dying. That's the message of Purim. So it was clear indication that they were being punished for attempting to prevent the rebuilding of the temple. Vashti followed a similar line. She said, "This temple was destroyed by my fathers, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. They should not rest until they saw it. They could not rest until they saw it in ruins. Now you're allowing the Jews to rebuild it? You will not escape punishment." Upon hearing his wife's words and receiving the accusatory letter, Ahasuerus was convinced, and he ordered the work on the temple halted. God punished both Ahasuerus and Vashti for this. They have their plans, God has his plans. It's not like God doesn't know what's going on in the world. It just depends on us, how we're going to react to our circumstances, what we know and what we understand. And then things continue on from there. Like we've said in the past, there's always an easy way. There's an event. And then there's our response. Is it the way that the Torah tells us to respond? Or is it just some other random way? Or some other way according to other people? So usually the way is to repent. That's what we need to do, and cry out to God, and he will save us. So Ahasuerus had taken the advice of Vashti and Haman out of fear that he would lose his kingdom. God therefore gave him a fitting punishment, but his life was shortened and his kingdom was divided. In the beginning, he ruled over the entire civilized world, but many nations rebelled against him. In the end, he was left with only 127 states. There was an important reason for this number. God knew that Ahasuerus would marry Esther. She was a true descendant of Sarah, who had lived 127 years, Genesis 23:1, and who had brought many people to believe in God. Esther would give birth to Darius II, who would, in the second year of his reign, give orders that the temple be rebuilt. So again, we know some of these numbers, like it was 127 years, and that corresponds to, this is how we understand the Torah. Some say that Ahasuerus mentioned here was not the son of Syria. So there's also other ways to interpret things sometimes, but it all makes sense. So I'm not going to read all the other different, you should be reading this on your own. So we'll just continue. I'll try to be a little bit better prepared going forwards, but there's just other opinions. So the Jews were good citizens, but Achashverosh felt that he had a good reason to hate them. His royal astrologers had told him that a Jew would take the royal crown from him and reign in his place. So, they were loyal subjects, but they hated them anyway. And their prediction referred to Darius Shtaim too, whom Esther would bear to Achashverosh. Because Darius' mother was Jewish, he too was considered Jewish. So Achashverosh, however, didn't know this. He was still married to Vashti at that time, and he couldn't even imagine that he would ever sire a Jewish heir himself. So he could only assume, based on this prediction, that the Jews would foment a revolution and would seize the throne from him, and it could only be avoided, he felt, by exterminating the Jews completely. Well, makes sense. Achashverosh thought of waging open war against the Jews and annihilating them, but he had his doubts. What if the Jews were victorious? What if their powerful God intervened for them? He feared that open warfare might make in itself make his astrologer's predictions come true. Therefore, when Haman approached him with the suggestion that the Jews be exterminated, Achashverosh said to him, "It's better that Haman do it, and I'm not going to be involved. I will then have nothing to fear." In this respect, both the king and Haman had the same motive. Haman wanted to kill the Jews, and the king wanted to be rid of the Jews. It's a win-win. Achashverosh made his great feast because he wanted the Jews to partake in forbidden food and drink. God would then become angry at them and would allow them to be annihilated. When you break the laws, then we do get punished if we don't repent. So they knew that back then. And so they wanted them to eat non-kosher. Now you just eat non-kosher because you don't feel like keeping kosher. Although Achashverosh hated the Jews as much as Haman did, the fact is not mentioned in the scripture. Achashverosh was a powerful king, and if the Jews had written openly about this hatred, it would have angered many nations of that period. The Megillah, however, alludes to it by beginning the account with Achashverosh. Achashverosh was the main cause of the danger that faced the Jews. The story begins by telling how Achashverosh killed his queen for refusing to obey his command. If one tried to minimize the miracle by arguing that Esther was in a unique position to speak up for her people, he would be able to see that her high position did not save Achashverosh's first wife, Achashverosh's first wife, Vashti. Haman was close enough to the king to have Vashti killed. So we can't say Achashverosh loved the beautiful Esther so much that he saved the people for her. We have to understand that he already killed one wife. He didn't do it because he loved Esther. He did it because God, everything that we're going to understand here. So our sages thus say that Achashverosh killed his wife because of his friend and killed his friend because of his wife. Such irony is not without cause. It's clear indication of divine intervention. So God's name also does not appear in the Megillah. True, the initial letters of the verse, Yavo Hamelech veHaman Hayom, let the king and Haman come today, spell out the tetragrammaton of God's name. Similarly, the final verse, Ki kalta alav hara'ah, and it had ended up badly for him, also spells out God's name. Still, God's name does not occur openly in the Megillah. The miracle of Purim was not an obvious miracle. To many people, it appeared to be a natural intrigue. Actually, it was a very great miracle. There was an important reason for this. The Jews had committed numerous sins. They had bowed down to Nebuchadnezzar's idol, see Daniel 3, and had enjoyed themselves at Achashverosh's non-kosher feast. Although they had been exiled from their land because of their sins, they were now sinning even more. So if God had performed an obvious miracle for the Jews, they would have thought that he had forgiven them without any effort on their part. They would not have improved their ways and would have deserved to be destroyed. God therefore made the miracle appear to be the result of a palace intrigue. It was not obvious that it was caused by divine intervention. The Jews would then realize that the next time they may not be so lucky. Therefore, God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah. Similarly, this book is called the Megillat of Esther, Megillat Esther, not the Megillah of Hadassah, even though Hadassah was Esther's Hebrew name. The name Esther can be linked to the root satar, meaning to hide or to conceal. The book speaks of a miracle that was concealed and hidden. Some say that God's name was not written in the Megillah because Mordechai knew prophetically that the Persians would translate into their own language, and he did not want to place God's name in it because translating it, they would substitute the name of one of their gods. So, furthermore, when Esther wrote the Megillah, she did not know if the sages of the Sanhedrin would agree to make it part of the sacred scriptures. After writing the account, Esther sent it to the sages and asked them to include it into the scriptures for all generations. This was not accomplished until the following year. Since Esther was not certain that her account would become scripture, she did not want to include God's name in it. It is wrong to write God's name in a mere storybook, which might be thrown away. There is another reason that it's called the Book of Esther and not the Book of Mordechai or Achashverosh. There was nothing unusual about anything described in the Megillah. Achashverosh made his feast merely to publicize his wealth and greatness. Mordechai's discovery of the plot of Bigam and Teresh, as we'll soon see, was perfectly plausible. The same is true of Haman's hatred of Mordechai and his people because Mordechai had refused to bow down to him. That's what made him Mordechai the Jew, as we're going to see. The one very surprising incident of the Megillah is Esther's marriage to Achashverosh. Esther was one of the greatest Jewish saints, one of the 7 prophetesses. The fact that she would marry a Gentile was highly unusual. No one could understand it until it was finally revealed that this marriage had been directed by divine providence in order that Esther would have the opportunity to save the Jews from Haman's plot. The book is therefore named after Esther. Furthermore, it was Esther who advised the Jews to repent by fasting 3 days and 3 nights. This act of repentance saved the Jews from destruction. The Megillah was therefore named after Esther. Okay, so we learned a little bit about pre-Purim times and a little bit about what's going on and the importance of the fast that we're also working towards, which is going to be March 13th, the 13th of Adar. So that's interesting that it's on the same day number. Adar, which is a special month, and it's on the 13th in the non-Hebrew calendar and on the 13th in the Hebrew calendar. I don't know if that means anything, but it seems pretty interesting to me. So that's where we are. We're going to continue on. So please stick with me video after video as we learn more and as we get closer to doing the fast of Esther, which all of the Jews hopefully will do with a lot of intention to get the same result, which was a redemption, but not this time, not behester, not hidden, but open, the final redemption. It's within, actually, as crazy as it may sound, even to myself, but it's in the realm of possibility because we know where we are. We're 5,785. And we know that we're only going to 6,000, and people from previous generations, like the Chafetz Chaim, said at the start of the Holocaust, that's the start of a period called Ikdid Mishicha, the footsteps of the redemption. So again, there are people who say, like, I looked into the Zohar and the heavens spoke to me and they said it's going to be, the redemption is coming. The redemption is going to definitely happen on Purim. And then when it doesn't happen, everyone's like, oh, everything's false, everything's fake, nothing's true. We continue to do what we're supposed to do as Jews, what all the Jews before us had done. We learn Torah, we practice Judaism, we try our hardest, and whatever we do is definitely doing things in our reality. We may or may not know what exactly they're doing. So whether or not the Mashiach comes on Purim or on Pesach, which is the Moed, which is a time after Purim, which is very auspicious for the redemption, because that's when the first redemption happened, was on Pesach. So regardless if the Mashiach comes or not this year, we continue to grow and to be better and to learn and practice the laws and to return to Hashem, so he will return to us. If not at this time, at another time. Maybe it's Rosh Hashanah, maybe it's Yom Kippur, maybe it's Thursday of some random day. We don't know. So, but it could be Purim. So at least we should try. That's what I think.